This is Beyond the Headlines, the learning edition with Dr. Q.
Language is a big problem in terms of what we see and how it affects the progression of young people in our education system. If we are able to teach a child in their mother language, the child is able to retain more information. And so when we talk about a holistic and progressive and inclusive education system, it's the entire thing.
Welcome to Beyond the Headlines with me, Dr. Q. Today I am joined by Sakile Mngadi, who is somebody very prominent in the Democratic Alliance. Sakile, welcome to BTH. I choose not to steal your light, so please do introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dr. Q, and a very good afternoon to your viewers. As you've said, my name is Sakile Mngadi. I'm a member of the provincial legislature in KwaZulu-Natal for the Democratic Alliance. I also serve as the caucus spokesperson for the DA in the legislature, and obviously for my portfolios, which is education, agriculture and rural development, and social development.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Sakile, how old are you that you do so many things all at once? You seem to be young.
Yeah, I am. I'm actually the youngest member of the government bench in the legislature. I'm 32 years old. And that's good, because I mean, young people should be given these opportunities and these platforms where important decisions are being made.
Is that the direction that the DA is taking? Because oftentimes we talk about the elderly generation occupying all these glorious, if I may refer to them as that, seats. And not really giving a chance to young people. Is this a strategic move by the Democratic Alliance, or it just happened by chance?
No, I think there's definitely an intention from the party to ensure that it grooms young leaders. We don't do the parachuting thing. I started in the party when I was a student at DASO, way back in 2012 at Nelson Mandela University. I worked my way up to DASO right up until federal level. And then I joined the youth, the DA youth. And there from branch level right up to federal level again. And then I only joined the mother body as a branch chairperson in eThekwini Ward 65. And so over the years, I've grown in the structures, the student wing and then the youth structure, and then now I'm here. So I definitely think that there's a deliberate effort from the DA to ensure that it grooms young leaders. We have a young leaders program in the party that definitely for 1 year invests a lot in up-and-coming talent. I was part of the 2020 class. So no, it's not by chance. I think the DA has been deliberate in ensuring that young people come up the ranks in the party. And so I'm very grateful for the platform that they've afforded me at this age to serve in a place like the legislature.
Wonderful. You'll be surprised to learn where I am currently based. So I was shocked when you mentioned the Nelson Mandela University. In the university, and one must say, for the longest of times since I got here, the institution has been led by, I think DASO is a baby of the DA, as you mentioned. So I think this is where DA leaders are groomed. So I suppose this is free advertisement for the DA. I'm not a DA affiliate. I must make that confession publicly. But you mentioned 3 portfolios that you are responsible for in KZN. You mentioned one in rural development and agriculture, I think, and then social development, then education. But I would like us to talk about education. And in particular, I'd love us to talk about the language policy in KZN. The reason why I do this is because not too long ago, I bought a newspaper as per the norm. And what struck me was a section that spoke about education, basic education in particular, in KZN. And the article highlights a crisis, and it frames it around the issue of language. Apparently, we still aren't getting it correctly. The issue of language is problematic for both teachers and the learners. So I would like to hear from you as somebody who is responsible for education in the province for the DA. What have been your observations when it comes to the issue of language in classrooms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Dr. Q, and I think it can be better framed if I take us back to the root of the issue. So yes, language is a big problem in terms of what we see and how it affects the progression of young people in our education system. But it can't be looked at solely as just language. It has to start from, early childhood development. Are our children at birth getting enough nutrition to prevent child stunting? Because what we now know is that a majority of our kids aren't, and a majority of our kids, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, they stunt, which affects their cognitive development. And so even when they enter the system, whether or not we are giving them mother tongue based education or whatever the situation is, just that developmental hurdle is affecting hundreds and thousands of learners in the system and their ability to progress effectively. So we need to also note that the nutrition aspect of a child's development in our country is a key area of focus that we need to look into, because far too many kids aren't receiving enough nutrition at birth, and that is causing them to stunt, which affects their cognitive development and their ability to learn. So when a child enters grade R having stunted, you can do anything from the department side as a Department of Education, but that child's cognitive ability will always be affected, and they will always struggle to take in information, retain that information, and then put it out when it's necessary. And so I think it's important that we understand from the onset that that is a critical issue, particularly in a province like KwaZulu-Natal. Then we must look at the issue of mother-based or mother tongue-based education, and how it is important to ensure that a child's mother tongue is a language of instruction that they get at the formative years of their education. So in KwaZulu-Natal, the majority of our kids are Zulu speaking, and it is important that between grade R and grade 4, that a lot of the concepts that we develop and that we teach our children are done in their mother or home language. That is something that is difficult because it's twofold. One, it's teachers that are present in the system. Are they able to instruct or teach in a language of preference of the child? So in the case of KZN, isiZulu. We have teachers that can convert mathematics, physical science, ML, MMS, all those subjects, art, history, whatever it is. Are there enough teachers in the system that can competently teach in that? I don't think that's the case. And that goes back to even universities and how they are training our teachers and how we are preparing our teachers, because right now it's a first come, first serve. If there's a vacancy, we deploy you, and then that's it. So that becomes a hurdle as well when it comes to language policy. The other thing is also where schools are situated. And the language policy that the SGB then decides the school will be, done in. A lot of parents want kids to go to what we used to call former Model C schools. We know that the language policy in the majority of those are English. And so when a child comes into such a setting, having, only been fluent in their home language, in KZN being isiZulu, then it creates another hurdle of, development for them as they make their way through the education system. So to understand the language policy issue, you need to understand it holistically. The child's development from, conception right up until entry into the system, then obviously the system itself in terms of its personnel and its ability to give education in a language of instruction that is the home language. And then, sort of the things that I've mentioned around the systemic issues of content and things like that. So it's a deeply troubling issue. I don't think we have managed to overcome it just yet. But it is something that I definitely look into quite intensely. And I know that from my colleagues at National, including the Minister, it is something that they are trying to correct in the system.
And I suppose this forms part of inclusive education, correct? The use of mother tongue-based languages.
Correct, because we now know that when a child in its formative years learns through mother tongue, they are able to understand concepts and retain concepts better, which helps them later on in their education journey. And so we know that when you don't instruct in the mother tongue, you create a developmental and a cognitive hurdle for the child. And that becomes a secondary challenge to them, and it does affect their progress in the education system. So definitely, inclusive education is important, and instruction in your mother tongue becomes a central point in that.
But one may argue, Sakile, that what is currently happening now is something that has been happening for decades. Why only now do we then say, let us enforce this language policy in classrooms? Others are arguing that by so doing, we are depriving our learners, because learners should actually be taught whatever language and whatever subject from as early as grade R, and they pick up right through matric. Because there is that saying, eti umtende ugodwa usemncane. And when you start now enforcing a different language in grade 4, it would be too much of a burden for the learners. Why now?
Yeah, look, I can't comment to what other administrations did. The science is there, the research is there, and the research is clear that home language or mother tongue language instruction in the formative years of an educational development of a child is essential in their ability to retain information. That's not Sakile's opinion. That's not the Democratic Alliance's opinion. That is a scientific fact. And so it becomes important that we devolve powers of language instruction, and we give those powers to SGBs who are formed by parents who are best positioned to decide the language policy of a school, which is something the Democratic Alliance believes in. But further than that, people saying that a child must come into the system and learn through any language that is available is problematic for the reasons I said. It creates developmental hurdles, unnecessary, hurdles that a child must now go through, because they, first of all, aren't just learning the content you're giving them. They're trying to understand what it means in that language, converting it into the language that they understand, and then digesting it. That is a developmental hurdle and an education hurdle. And so for the formative years especially, you don't want to do that, because you're ensuring that a child retains less information, and that has effects as they progress from grade 5, 6, 7 and onwards. And so that is something that we know now is a thing, and that we are working to correct. So I don't know, Dr. Q, maybe you need to bring in the former individuals that were responsible for education to tell you why they didn't step on this when they should have. But now that we are in the position we're in KZN, we have a GPU, nationally we have a GNU. We've come with those DA policies to say it's important that we look at language, but more importantly, that we ensure that communities become the custodians of language policy for their schools, because they are best positioned to decide that.
Do you perhaps have any practical examples where nations or regions have been using their indigenous languages or mother tongues in their learning or schooling system, and the results are positive? Because for you to take up research and say, we base our facts on these published articles or what researchers 1, 2, and 3 have said, surely it would have been implemented somewhere or piloted somewhere, and then you model what has been piloted.
The World Education Forum has many of these, and I know the minister was there not too long ago. But just look at how, in particularly first world and European countries, this is modeled quite well. Germany becomes a classic example of how the German education system, while it is bilingual in its formative years, generally gives kids instruction in German, before the later system converts to English. Singapore does a similar thing. I know the Chinese government, in terms of instruction in Mandarin particularly, and then in the later years introducing English as a medium of instruction, is something that the Chinese government and its education system implements quite strongly. And we see how those nations fare when it comes to their competitiveness in terms of education. The Chinese are in the top 10, the Germans are in the top 10, Singaporeans are in the top 10, and so forth. And in South Africa, we're in the bottom 10 because we now know that, you know, the majority of our learners, when they get to grade 4, can't read and understand for meaning. That's primarily because of those developmental hurdles that I speak about. If you're able to teach a child in their mother language, the child is able to retain more information. So when it comes to a point where you test their cognitive ability and their ability to read for meaning at grade 4, if we did that, our children would be much more successful in you know, standards of education that they are getting and their ability to retain that information. So it all goes hand in hand. That's why we aren't faring well, particularly in that department.
But Sakile, would you really say that reading for meaning is associated with the language itself, or it would be the manner in which a learner is taught in the classroom?
I think it's both. It goes hand in hand. I'll give you an example. If mhlawumbe ngiphume emakhaya, ekhaya kukhulunywa isiZulu, and then, you know, in grade 1, mina, for the past 6 years, ngikhula ngikhuluma isiZulu ekhaya, and then in grade 1, I get put into this English school where my English and my ability to comprehend in English isn't developed, or at least developed to a level where in grade 1, when we are testing your identification of letters and numbers and what they mean and how they sound and your phonics and things like that, it's going to be a challenge for you to catch up. And by the time you are in grade 4 and we are testing your ability to read a word, understand what it means, and say it in a way that shows us you are able to understand, because that's what they test at that level. You are playing catch up from grade 1 because you are now, first of all, learning a new language, learning its concepts, and then trying to retain that information. So it definitely has an impact by that time in grade 4 when we're testing your cognitive understanding of the education you've received. To say that you were playing catch up, and that's probably why when we are now testing, do you understand these concepts when you read them? Are you reading for meaning? You aren't faring at a level that is satisfactory. I think that the common sense there is clear, and in the science there is clear too. And I think that's the main problem that we have, particularly at that level. And that's something that we haven't seen government pour too much attention into until recently.
To be quite fair, I think at a national level, we've been seeing advancements when it comes to that, because the issue of language has been spoken about from the times of the former minister, Yenji Mocheha. And I remember during the first metric announcement by the current minister, Huarube, or please correct me. Sorry?
Kwahube.
Yes, Kwahube. She was actually saying that they will pick up on that because a good foundation had been laid. So I suppose it is not entirely new, at least at a national level. Not sure what was happening in the province. But then I wanted to also say, I am aware that in KZN, there's only one institution, I speak under correction, that teaches isiZulu as a compulsory module for all their students. That would be the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And for individuals doing education, I think it carries on throughout the program, or they stop somewhere within the program. Why is it that teachers are not taught at varsities the language that they are supposed to instruct students in, especially foundation-based teachers?
Yeah. Look, that's outside my scope of expertise, because that then becomes higher education and sort of the design of programs and how they then tailor programs, particularly for teachers who are looking to teach in KZN. And I think it's great if UKZN has now jumped on that and is ensuring that the teachers at the very least are learning how to teach in isiZulu. I think that's very important. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's again the two systems, basic education, higher education, that continuity or that link or that relationship to say in this specific sector, these are the certain skills that we need, and this is what we should be seeing in the content that you are teaching individuals who are saying as a means of a profession, they are heading into this. So for instance, people studying to be teachers. I think there needs to be a greater relationship between the department identifying a shortfall in skills and then relaying that information to the powers that be in higher education, or policymakers in higher education, or people who design courses in higher education, to say the course should be tailored this way to ensure that we have enough skilled teachers that are able to fit this shortage of skills that we are seeing. But I can definitely tell you, and I've traveled to all 12 districts extensively in this province, that when you get to primary schools and you're in the class and you're listening to the way, particularly in rural areas, the way in which the teachers are instructing, there is definitely a shift. They are teaching in isiZulu where they need to, and are converting and translating where they need to as well. I've definitely witnessed that, and it's not just isolated, it is widespread.
Yeah, because the reason why I asked that question, by the way, Sakile, is if it is so important for learners to learn ngesiZulu in the classroom, the teacher must be as competent in order for them to be able to teach izingane ngesiZulu and to get into their heads. Teaching isiZulu language in general is not a very easy thing. And so I do think that it has to be enforced from the time that they are being trained at a varsity level, university level, or college level. I'm not sure if you still have education colleges in South Africa. But I do see that we will forever have this problem for as long as there isn't that synergy between the Department of Basic Education and the training institutions, especially the ones that focus on the lower levels, which would be the foundation phase.
No, definitely, 100% agree. Like I said, there needs to be that joint partnership between basic education and higher education. But I also want to maybe correct something. It's not, I mean, it's isiZulu majority of the time in KwaZulu-Natal, but home language is I think the key word here, or mother tongue is the key word here. We need to have teachers that are fundamentally trained in all home languages that are here in South Africa. And we need to ensure that those educators find places in schools where they are able to then instruct in that language. I think that's the policy position that I would support, and I know the Democratic Alliance would support greatly. So whether it's English as a home language, Afrikaans, isiZulu, isiXhosa, Sepedi, Tswana, whatever it is, we need to ensure that we have enough teachers trained to instruct in those languages, so that when they are placed in schools where that is the home language, they are able to sort of deliver the curriculum correctly in a language that the child will understand. Very important for that to happen in the foundation phase, grade 1 to 4.
I liked the term that they used in this article. Interestingly, this article was written by Sakile, but his surname is Dube. I like the term that he uses here. It's mother tongue-based bilingual education.
Yes.
That bilingual component of this phrase, does it include other alternative languages or additional languages even within the foundation phase?
It should. And remember, language policy is based per province. And so the home language differs depending on which province you are. But the bilingual conversion will always then be English. And that's what I said earlier when I said when you go into the classrooms now, particularly in rural KZN, you're seeing that the teacher is explaining concepts in ngesiZulu and then sort of translating that into what the same meaning is in English, so that the child understands fundamentally what is being talked about, but also how to then relay that in another language, and that language being English, which is important because as they progress through the system, the the language does change, and you want the child at the point where, you know, concepts are being explained in English to have a fundamental and a deep understanding of what that means, which isn't happening right now when we test our grade 4 learners.
Yeah, I want to quote something from this article. So this is somebody that was interviewed. She's a school teacher, and she says, in isiZulu, a rectangle is ungande. Writing the familiar word on a scrap paper. Next to it, she scribbles another term, irrectangile. She pauses, shaking her head. This is where we lose our learners.
Yeah.
They understand the isiZulu word, but when you start borrowing, that sounds like a completely different language. It's like starting school again.
Yes.
So another principal who was also interviewed before this article was published indicated that for mathematics and science and other subjects, I think he took it to the high level, but we do have mathematics in lower classes as well. For mathematics, it is very difficult to use alternative languages because to use the mother tongue, because there isn't any appropriate term for the language that is used in that particular subject. How do we get this right? Because I've read so many books as well where I see that leli gama is borrowed from another language and it's not necessarily a Zulu word. Like an apple. I-apula would be written as i-apile. I'm not even sure if i-apula is the correct word for an apple in isiZulu.
Namgazi apula, but you raise an important point. Ek na hoërskool Pearson toe gaan. So I went to an Afrikaans English high school, and you definitely see the difference in terms of Afrikaans and how words, particularly in mathematics and science, exist in Afrikaans, which is, it allows Afrikaans speakers to understand concepts in their home language. We haven't done enough, particularly in African languages, to develop our languages to a point where the medium of instruction is consistent at whatever level of education you're in. And this is why it then becomes problematic to try and, you know, continue that language of instruction as a home language through the intermediate phase and the senior phase right up until university, because some of these concepts just don't exist as words, or if they do, they are very difficult and complex words to understand. So we definitely need to do a lot more work in investing in language development of African languages, so that in time, the system then is able to accommodate learners from an intermediate to a senior phase. But for the time being, it doesn't dismiss the narrative that at a foundation phase, grade 1 to 4, we do need to strengthen our mother tongue instruction to ensure that our learners have deeper meanings of concepts, so that when they are reading, they're reading for meaning and understanding. And I think that then helps them further their education in the system.
Lovely. I just want to say something. Ek is jammer, ek kan nie praat nie, maar ek probeer Afrikaans leer.
Oh, it's okay.
Are you going to give me at least a 6 out of 10?
That's all right, mate, bro. Don't worry about it. I'll give you an 8. You're from KZN, so we understand.
Thank you so much. I don't like that. I don't like that last part that you're from KZN, because it denotes that KZN people don't want to learn other languages, which I find to be a great misconception. But
before I left the province, I did my primary schooling in KZN, and then I did my high schooling in the Eastern Cape. I had never interacted with other languages as much as I've seen as you leave our province. But I definitely agree with you that there definitely is an interest of people to learn, and there is a misconception that, you know, abantu KwaZulu-Natal, it's Zulu or nothing.
Yes, yes, it's not very true. It's not very true. Okay, so I suppose another thing for me would be, let's now go 10, 20 years down the line. We've bred a generation where learners were taught in their mother tongue. in the first few grades, in their foundational grades up to grade 4. How do you envision changes after they've matriculated or as they progress in their schooling years and into their careers?
Yeah. I don't want to look at that just simply from a language perspective. I want to look at it as a holistic education system that is supportive in nature and progressive in delivery. And what we mean when we say that is, so like I said, from conception, when a mother conceives a child, is she getting enough nutrition so that the child that is born is fully developed and is healthy? We need to look at that. When the child then is born, from age 0 to age 5, is that child daily receiving enough nutrition to prevent it from stunting or other, developmental defects? If we get that right, we've won, the second battle. Then when the child comes into the education system, grade R, grade 1, and so forth, is that child then being taught in the language of home or its mother tongue instruction taking place, so that fundamental concepts are being retained by that child? So as that child leaves the foundation phase into the intermediate phase, that child has a solid grasp of numeracy and a solid grasp of being able to read for meaning and understanding, so that when we start introducing difficult concepts of numeric nature or literature, that child is able to then grasp those concepts and then further do well. And is then the entire schooling environment becoming a place that is conducive for that education? Because mother tongue instruction is one thing, but if there are no textbooks, if the school leaks, if there's no electricity, if there's no way in which the teacher can show these things to the children, then we've only done half the work. And so when we talk about a holistic and progressive and inclusive education system, it's the entire thing. It doesn't start at grade R, it starts from conception. And so that if we get that right as government from the very beginning of a child or a human being existing, right up until they leave the system in grade 12, we're going to start seeing a difference in the end product that we produce as a country. And that's when we can then start becoming more competitive, with our global partners. Because fundamentally, we're just nowhere. When we look at the kind of children that leave our education system versus, the countries that are constantly in the top 10. Those countries have understood that development starts at conception, and the support needs to be given from then and throughout the system holistically. Yeah.
So I've got a sister who is doing grade 4 currently. When I ask her the composition of a classroom, she would tell me that there's Zulu learners, there's Zulu speaking learners, there are English speaking learners, there's Afrikaans speaking learners, and there is the fourth one would be Indian speaking learners. I'm just trying to think now, if we were to implement this mother-based language policy fully everywhere in the province, what would it look like, seeing that there's so much diversity and schools don't only recruit students based on race, learners, I mean to say, sorry, based on race and based on language? How would we get it right in the classrooms?
So this is why it's important. And people always say the Democratic Alliance is difficult. Why are they, picking apart aspects of the Bella Bill? And this is why we say that it is important that, communities and the student governing body be given the powers to determine what the language policy of a school is. Because if you're talking about the school your sister's in, it's a multiracial school, it seems. And so there are people from different backgrounds, but those different people come together and form the SGB. And so at that SGB level, they will be more empowered to understand what their children in terms of language policy need. And so if the language policy of that school is decided to be English, then because it benefits everybody, then that should be fine, because the community has decided that the children of that community are best posed to learn at that level with that language. But if you devolve those powers to a central authority who'll say, well, 70% of this community says that they are Zulu, so we're going to just change the language policy of that school to be Zulu. That then becomes the issue that we've said we have a point of contention with as a Democratic Alliance, because you're not looking at the situation on the ground, you're looking at a piece of paper and then determining policy, which is not the correct way to do things, because these policies affect real people. And so that's why then it becomes essential for governing bodies to be given the authority and the rights to determine language policy, because they are representatives of the community at a school management level.
That's very interesting. I suppose everyone wants to preserve their language. I'm just thinking, I'm going to give you two scenarios. The Zululand region in Melmoth and Phoenix in Durban. The likelihood there, even though those are two regions that have multiracial schools that comprise of your Indians, English, Afrikaans, and Zulus, chances are in Phoenix, the community would say, we need our learners to learn that which aligns with Indians. And in Zululand, they would say we want them to learn that which align with the people of the land, which would be isiZulu. And I'm sitting here thinking if we are not just playing in circles here, because if that were to be the approach, chances are there would be a number of parents that would be dissatisfied with what the SGB concludes when it comes to the language issue of a particular school. So I don't know if that would be doing justice in the school system.
I think those are interesting examples that you put through. And I don't have a definitive answer for you, because it's not possible 100% of the time to make 100% of the people happy. But I also want to highlight a important thing, which is the involvement of parents in their children's education, and how important it is to ensure that the institution you're choosing to enroll your child in aligns with your child and what you want your child to be. Oftentimes, people just choose the nearest school or the first school of choice, or the school they think is the best school, and then they just leave, and then they don't even involve themselves in matters of SGB and policy of the school and things like that. So if we can maybe start getting that right, getting parents involved, come to parent meetings, involve yourself at an SGB meeting, vote when language policies are being voted for and budgets and things like that. Vote when curriculums are being reintroduced or changed, and make your voice heard if your child is in the system and you want what's best for your child. I would start the conversation on that level before we sort of overcomplicate it, because again, SGBs aren't made up of random people. They are made up of, half of them are representatives of the teaching body, and the other half are representatives of the community as represented by the learners that are enrolled, so parents of the learners in that school. They are the individuals that then decide on policy matters of the school and things like language policy. And so you would assume that the representation there would allow for a language policy to be decided on a fair level. But I certainly can't sit here and lie to you and say every single time when that happens, 100% of the children are accommodated or are happy. I don't think that happens, and I can't sit here and say that happens. But I know that the way in which the system is designed to do that gives the best opportunity for inclusion, and that's why we talk about inclusive education, for people to then make decisions that are inclusive for their children in the system.
Maybe a second last question, or the very last question. Have you guys conducted a survey or interacted with communities and parents and asked really if this language crisis, in inverted commas, is indeed a crisis that needs to be attended to, or it is something that was purely research informed and government saw it fit to implement it?
Absolutely. When we were doing our engagements around the billable, because this is where this all stemmed from, right? And we were looking, and I mean, there was a lot of concern, particularly in the Pretoria North area and other areas around the country. We were engaging with those communities. One thing about the Democratic Alliance, it's a very big organization, and we have a very large footprint in all provinces in this country. And so when we engage on these kinds of issues, particularly on the level of policy, we go right to ground roots level. And we did petitions, we did surveys, we were engaged communities, we held public meetings. And the general sentiment was that the devolving of powers, so the centralization, of power to government to decide language policy, really disenfranchised communities because government would decide on a level of black and white paper more than interacting with the community and what the community's needs are. And people felt that you were taking away that power from SGBs who are best positioned because, like I said, they are part of the community, but more importantly, the children's parents that are in that school to then decide those issues. And so when we took a position on this, it was informed by research, which also supports our narrative that mother-based education, mother tongue-based education, is the best kind of education to afford a child. But it was also based by community interactions, based on surveys, on those interactions, public meetings, and so forth. So it was a holistic approach that we took when we developed our position on the matter. And I think it is the correct position if you look at the results that we get when children are learning from their mother tongue.
Interesting. It would be interesting for me to hear from parents themselves watching this show and listening from our audio platforms, whether or not they are indeed in support of this mother tongue-based language policy in schools. And again, this is informed by my knowing that most parents still have aspirations of their kids going to your multiracial schools where English is a dominant language, where it is a first language, and whatever mother tongue in the region would be a first additional language. So it would be interesting to hear those thoughts, Sakile. But
yeah, Dr.
having
Q,
said that, sorry?
Yeah, sorry, I was saying it must also be said that mother tongue doesn't mean you're not going to learn English. It just means that, particularly in your formative years, you're learning in a language you understand so that you retain information better. Yeah.
Definitely. Any last word for you, Sakile, before I let you go?
Look, the education system, particularly in KZN, is under a lot of pressure. There's been fiscal austerity for many years, 26 billion disinvested from it. But I certainly think that with regards to the government of provincial unity that I'm a member of, and the government of national unity, we have really great people who are dedicated in ensuring that we get things right, because the future of our country depends on it. If we are not going to be individuals that take this work seriously in turning the tide and ensuring that there's not only just education, but inclusive quality education that is progressive in nature, we're not going to change the prospects of our country. So I'm really excited to have been given this platform by the party in serving in the legislature and trying to create the reform that we need in our education system so that the output, which is our children, receive the best possible education.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Sakile. We hope to see you again when we ask you to join us on this platform. I think this has been a wonderful conversation, and I do think that we may take you up for a second round still on language policy. With that said, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Q. Thanks.
This is Beyond the Headlines, the Learning Edition with Dr. Q.